Welcome to Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. With us today is Dr. Andy Bard Schmookler, PhD, a prize-winning author from the former Democratic candidate for Congress in Virginia's very red Shenandoah Valley, former talk radio host, summa cum laude graduate of Harvard University, PhD awarded with distinction in a program specially created to accommodate his original theory explaining how civilization has developed, and a frequent columnist in newspapers around the United States of America. Dr. Schmookler, how are you doing today?
Doing fine. Nice to be with you again.
Great. In continuation with A Better Human Story, which is a series Politics Done Right is doing with Dr. Schmookler, who has a website already titled A Better Human Story. Today, you pretty much got a bit philosophical. It almost seemed like a sermon in the article that we're going to be discussing today, prescient, especially in these times. We want to talk about how the evolutionary perspective gives us a better human story. And there are some items in there that I think I may want to challenge, but I want you to first explain to me, how does the evolutionary perspective give us a better human story when we're talking about evolution?
Well, I think it's important to recognize what a huge set of implications there are if you have people who, for thousands of years, were trying to understand the world as they saw it, and they had no idea how that world had come into being. They were just looking around, and they had no idea how far back time went. And so they came up with theories that were like 5,000 years and special creations and the emergence of civilization like in a matter of generations or something like that. They had no idea what science has shown, which is very different, that for 3.5 billion years, life was engaged in an evolutionary process that created us, and that involved certain kinds of order that our species stepped out of very recently, like 10 or 12,000 years ago. Our species took a step that was completely unprecedented in the history of life. It was a step on the path of civilization, which I define as those societies created by a creature that has extricated itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically by inventing its own way of life. It's breaking out of an order that had taken billions of years to create. And that has implications, but they were not visible to the people who handed down religions with ideas like original sin. What I say the evolutionary perspective shows is that they stepped out of order into disorder, inevitably. Civilization inevitably emerges into disorder. With us or any other species on any other planet, that's the way it's going to be. And that disorder has a dynamic built into it. It's going to be a war of all against all. It's going to mean only those who can prevail in a war of all against all can survive. So the system's dynamic, not human nature.
Now,
what determines the way the civilization evolves.
I want to back up a second, because when I read the paper, there's a gist that I followed, and that is, we broke out to create civilization. That is how it seemed like you're saying, and that there was something superior to the civilization as the humans within this planet see it, right? And I sat down and I wanted to play devil's advocates for a while, and this is a little bit off, but is an ant colony a civilization? Is a herd that has a systemic way of existing a civilization? Are these entities that live in the wild, never needing particular shelter? We see civilizations as being somehow superior to all these other forms of organization.
Let me break in about because let's stick with the ant colony.
Right.
If we define civilization, I've been working on this for more than half a century. This is what I think is the best definition of civilization. Those societies created by a creature that has extricated itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically by inventing its own way of life. In other words, a way of life, a structure of the society that was not passed down through biological selection, but was invented out of the creative intelligence of the creature. That is not the ant colony. They have not extricated themselves from the niche in which they evolved biologically. That is the niche in which they evolved biologically. But when we go from being like primate bands, like we have been until 10 or 12,000 years ago, into inventing things which can grow without any particular limit, in which people are controlling nature instead of gathering what's spontaneously provided by nature, it breaks all the old rules about size and structure and means of subsistence. It can go in almost any direction. That's not happening with ants or herds of caribou or something like that. What's unprecedented is that you step out of order created by evolution, into a new system that was not shaped by biological evolution, and that disorder is very dangerous. We didn't know we were unleashing this kind of anarchy, but that was inevitably what would happen. And so,
well, I mean, that occurs because, again, we're doing it outside the realms of what's needed. Let's give an example. Was it logical for us to move from us to leave the equator and move into colder areas? Well, that came with some dangers, and when those dangers applied, we had to use a certain kind of clothes, right, to protect ourselves, unlike those who were predisposed to live in these areas. So, I mean, from that point of view, it seems like a lot of the chaos that civilizations create, it's constantly solving for the chaos it creates. True?
Wait, human beings spread throughout the whole planet before civilization. I mean, Australia and the New World eventually. So, and they were living in ways that were cultural, but they were pretty much continuous with the primate past out of which we had emerged. So they hadn't really, even though we had fire, which was a big deal, and we had language and we had weapons and tools, basically, in terms of size and structure and how they fed themselves, they were pretty much a continuation of going back even before we were human.
So I need to interrupt you here because I want to get where do you then say civilization start? Because what I see in your statement, and tell me if I'm wrong, is a judgment as to what qualifies a civilization. My way, which is doing X, Y, Z versus the guys who continue.
It's got to do with whether it is the creature's creative intelligence that's designing this life. Up until we started doing something like the rise of agriculture or something like that, no species had ever done anything like that. They had never, invented out of their creative imagination a whole new way that hadn't even been vetted by the process of natural selection. So you ask, where does it begin? Well, it begins when hunter-gatherers started domesticating the animals they used to hunt. And they started planting and harvesting the plants they used to gather. That's probably the switch that made it possible. They got a degree of control over nature that allowed them to grow in population with the imperatives that creates. And it becomes possible to harvest, to deal with ever more power over nature by creating these new kinds of organization that were not the product of natural selection, but were, how chiefdoms became kingdoms, became empires. This is something which is a different kind of it's a social evolutionary process that grows out of anarchy, and it is discontinuous with 3.5 billion years that went before it. And the evolutionary perspective tells us that was a big deal when we took that step, that unprecedented step. It has major implications, and even though it's been more than a century and a half now since Darwin put out the idea that we didn't emerge 6,000 years ago in the Garden of Eden. We emerge out of a very long process in which things get shaped in life-serving ways because that's what survives. And that breaking out of that had implications that nobody could have anticipated. It's not like it's our fault. We're the victims of being the first creatures on this planet that had the means to invent a whole different new way of life. You know, the chimpanzees have sticks they use to get the termites, and we're not the only ones that got tools. And there may be languages of a primitive sort that are out there among prairie voles or elephants or whatever. But we took it so far that we could transform the way we lived. People invented whole different ways of living. And then they were thrown into an anarchy where different societies, each one representing a different cultural approach, but different societies are engaged in a world in which, unlike the world out of which they emerged, the interactions among things are governed by nothing. They're governed by no natural order, and it's fragmented, and there's no human order. They're basically engaged in what Hobbes called the war of all against all, which is the result, inevitably, of anarchy. And out of that, there is a process of selection. Only certain kinds of society. You like my phrase, the spirit of the gangster.
Oh, I love that. Yeah,
so that comes in right here. That the evolutionary perspective shows that when you take that step onto the path of civilization, it is inevitable that the spirit of the gangster will play a disproportionate role in shaping that creature's civilization.
I want to read a piece from your article. You said any creature, because believe it or not, my brother, I think this particular statement is presumptuous. Check this out. Any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos that takes the step onto the path to civilization will inevitably get swept up, regardless of that creature's nature, into the same social evolutionary process that has made the course of human civilization as destructive and tormented, as ugly as it has been. The ugliness we see in human history, and then you says, which tells you that the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large.
Okay, you think
those are
I think I can prove it.
Hold on. To me, those are conflicting statements, but go ahead and...
No. See, I say any creature on any planet is going to get into the same kind of a mess. And the reason is, wherever civilization may have emerged, and we don't know, whether we're unique or we're one of billions or whatever, but they will have evolved, their life will have evolved on this planet and will have created this creature that has the capacity to invent its own way of life, which it will then do, and it will inevitably emerge into that anarchy. Because that's what it means when you start inventing your way of life, and you've got a diversity of of civilized societies that have to interact with each other, and there is nothing to regulate that interaction, nothing that has evolved biologically, and nothing that the creature has invented to keep it from being the spirit of the gangster that takes over how its history unfolds.
And that's why I said in conflict, because I think I was with you. I agreed with the entire paragraph, and then the conclusion was, which tells you that the ugliness we see in human history
is not human. It's not a contradiction. It follows logically. If there are systemic forces that inevitably mean that for the first whatever of a creature's civilization on any planet, it's going to unfold like what we see like this. It'll be full of empires and tyranny and enslavement and tortures and the inculcation of cultural norms and moralities that are at war with the creature's nature. It's inevitable. That's inevitably going to be the case. And that means that it is going to be an ugly history, regardless of the creature's nature. So I say the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large, meaning it is instead what is made inevitable by a social evolutionary process that inevitably emerges out of the anarchy that civilization inevitably plunges into.
I think the difference in the way we think about this is that let me give an example with, let's say, gays. Okay, I learned that I was wrong in the way I thought about gays, and then not only that, but then if for those who believe in a supreme being, a creator or whatever, and if they believe that the creator created human beings, and within human beings people have different attributes, etc., then you have to say that if gayness was a mistake, I'm just using this as an example, then that is of God, right? It's not the gay person. So I mean, when I look at your statement here, that is how I am qualifying it. I'm saying, wait a minute, then if humans created all this anarchy, right, and by having the creation of this anarchy, we get some sort of the ugliness that comes about. Even if you want to say that that's not human nature, it was created by humans, which, in my opinion, makes it human nature.
See, I wrote the book, The Parable of the Tribes, which
correct,
which was the book.
A lot of pages, man, a lot of pages.
It won a prize, and it's the idea that I'm presenting here, essentially, which took over my life starting in 1970. It got me my doctorate, a whole bunch of stories. But you're saying that. Say it in one sentence for me.
Yeah, well, what I'm trying to say is that the way you got to say it's not human nature. First of all, let me first tell you that I agree with you. Let me finish. I agree with you that it's not human nature. But the reason I said earlier about the statement being presumptuous is the statement that preceded that made it seem to be that, after all, it is human nature. That's all I'm saying.
See, in that statement preceded it, there was the phrase which you read, regardless of the nature of that creature.
Yes.
So, see, we think that we're to understand what goes on in the world in terms of what we see the people doing, like Nazis at Auschwitz or something like that.
Yeah.
But if you see that it is inevitable when a creature takes that crucial step onto the path of civilization, they will unleash a force of such brokenness, something which is, it ramifies through the system. And that's another thing that you can sort of derive from this, that a coherent force emerges in the system that drives things in a particular direction. And so people are acting, but it is the system that determines how the system develops. I mean, I have a line that that was a big deal to me in the 1970s and the 1980s. That which determines the chooser determines the choice.
Excellent.
And the tyrant, a Putin or Hitler or Trump type figure that has this inordinate impact on the course of human history, monsters are way overrepresented on the pages of history.
Exactly.
And we look at it and we say, these damn human beings, they keep throwing up monsters. But that which determines the chooser is the systemic force of brokenness that is molding things over time in ways that make the spirit of the gangster a dominant force in the world.
I think that's one of the most important statements here, because I mean, as simplistic as I'm going to say here, where I preach all of the times that most people are good, unfortunately, most people's votes are ill-conceived, which gives us not good leaders. I know you've heard of the benevolent dictator, or the person who has omnipotent power and never uses it for harm, but just for good. I agree with the statement. The ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. Unfortunately, however, we are responsible for, based mostly on our ignorance and gullibility, to have brought those peoples forth.
I think we should, we're responsible, but I think we should have compassion for our kind.
I agree.
We took a step that was a manifestation of our unprecedented gifts. Other animals, no other animal has been able to take that step. So we should have compassion for the fact that we stumbled into something that we couldn't have anticipated. It wouldn't be reasonable to think that the people who first started planting gardens next to their huts and creating pens in which goats or sheep or whatever were penned, it's not reasonable to have imagined that they were in any position to anticipate that they had put us on an incline that was going to lead to the ugly tyrannies that came 5,000 years later. It was inevitably going to unfold in some such way, and we should have compassion for ourselves, even as we hold ourselves responsible for trying to put it together before we destroy ourselves.
Now let's move on from there, because I think that can lead us, given that you're talking about the compassion portion now, can lead us into what we call the spiritual dimension. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So we've talked about the part of evolution, the non-evolutionary portion of civilization being causal for what we're done. Now, what's the spiritual perspective?
Yeah, so the evolutionary perspective, I put forward two principles. We've discussed the first principle, which is how
and we dabbled into the second as well. Yeah.
But the second principle is that, for the most part, whatever we see, it has been crafted into the inherent nature of a creature. Is the fact that it's there means that it must have been life-serving, because otherwise evolution wouldn't have favored the ones that had that kind of characteristic. Now, an important dimension of the characteristics that are inherent to our nature are embedded in the experiential realm. That the secular, the first idea I have says, let's get rid of original sin. It's not human nature. The second one says the secular worldview has this stupid idea that the moral and spiritual dimensions are less than real and need to be given less than complete honor because they're merely subjective. They are not merely subjective. The evolutionary perspective says that we have tendencies to experience certain things because they helped our ancestors to survive. And one of the dimensions in which people, and we don't, this is not just human beings, everybody with a cat or a dog will recognize this. We experience things in terms of better and worse. We feel fulfillment and we feel misery. We feel pleasure, we feel pain. It's built into us, and it's built into us for a very good reason. In order to survive, a creature has to do what survival requires. And life has chosen as one of the key strategies to make sure of that is to create an experiential dimension between the better and the worse. The things that feel better, we pursue. And they feel better because the ancestors who experienced them positively were more likely to survive, to pass their DNA along in our direction than the ones who didn't feel that way. So we get shaped, I don't know whether it starts in whether you talk about one-celled creatures, but certainly long before you get to us, the better and the worse. And the experience of things being better and things being worse is part of life's strategy for unfolding and enduring.
Tied into the spiritual form. Tied into the spiritual because we're
the spirit. Okay, the value thing we got in common with lots of other creatures. It may be that the spiritual is unique to human beings, but I don't know. What elephants do and what gorillas do in the spiritual dimension, I don't know. But I do know that a substantial portion of the human population across cultures and throughout history have experiences they describe as being somehow like of a special dimension. Which we often refer to as spiritual, but whatever the words might be. But they're characterized by an unusual feeling of depth, of breaking through to another level, and one comes back from those experiences with things that one regard as important spiritual truths, and they can be motivating, of such impact on the people who experience them. That's very often the whole course of a life is impacted and goes in a different direction. So it seems to be a real part of human nature, or whether how universal it is, I don't know. But not everybody responds to music.
Is it real?
It is real because it is a part of our human nature, and it impresses upon us certain things with a special sense of their essential reality. The truths, the reality that people see in those experiences feels more real. And so we have to ask ourselves, well, what is it accounts for that being, part of human experience? Well,
I mean, actually, it seems to me like you already, the conclusion of your paper gives the answer with one sentence, even though you kind of explain it thereafter. When you say, filling important holes in the contemporary secular worldview. That's what I looked at it.
If the spiritual dimension, it can be recognized, what the evolutionary perspective shows, as having been life-serving, throughout the development of who we are. And I have some thoughts about why it might be particularly humans who have these experiences. Then we can infer that it's been life-serving. And I think it can be plausibly argued that if we look at what people come back from that spiritual dimension with, they do look life-serving, and as we head into the future where we really might destroy ourselves, we should honor that dimension, which has been giving human beings, showing paths that lead to survival. And it can do that for us too, but not if we denigrate it, like the secular worldview, which says, oh, that's just, that's merely subjective or something. No, there may be important subjective elements. Not everybody sees the same thing. But the thing that's in there is not subjective. It is a manifestation of what it takes for human beings to survive. So we should listen to that voice. It is likely to tell us things about, and I use the example of the spiritually transformative experiences of American astronauts. When the first people went out there and saw this blue marble, the first human beings to see it, some people had their lives changed by a spiritual experience. I think that there's something mysterious about this, but I think the evidence suggests that people come back from that dimension with very important messages that can help guide us to creating the kind of civilization we need to avoid blowing ourselves up or so completely destroying this the biosphere that our lives fall apart too.
So, Doctor, in conclusion, how the evolutionary perspective gives, tell me in a few sentences, then summarize, how does the evolutionary perspective give us a better human story?
Well, our job is to get our act together before we destroy ourselves. The better human story, first of all, tells us we were better creatures than we thought we would be. And I think we could imagine how, if we had an image of ourselves as inherently better, that would fortify us. I think we live down to our expectations. So I think it's better that way. And then the other thing is, I'm just alluding to it. I think if we take the issue of good and evil more seriously, and that we didn't get much into that. And I think if we take we look to the spiritual dimension for guidance more than we do with our contemporary secular worldview. Get rid of original sin, bring in real honor to the spiritual dimension, because we need all the guidance we can. Our ancestors survived because they had that spiritual guidance, whether it's shamans in Siberia or wizards in the Amazon. There has been a place for the spiritual dimension to guide human societies further back than civilization. And now that we're in this mess, we really need it. And so we should fully honor it and tune in and make the better human story one where we can survive for the long haul on a healthy planet, rather than destroy ourselves and take the planet down with us.
Dr. Andy Bart Schmookler, thank you once again for enlightening us under a better human story. Thank you.
Thank you, Egberto.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead, number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.